So welcome everyone. I'm Dave Solano, President, New York Metro InfraGard. I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar on the financial services sector, navigating COVID's impact on the financial services industry with lessons learned and the actions your company can take from their experience. I'll introduce you to Tony Cifolletti, our Financial Services Sector Chief. Tony?
Thank you, Dave. Thanks everyone for attending. Based on the attendance, it looks like we have folks from most of the parts of the country, possibly international, and we have both financial services industry participants and also people from outside of financial services. And it's only based on email and actual the name of the company. It also looks like we have a big and small companies both joining, so that's great. So we'll try to keep it generic enough and useful enough so that we can hit the entire audience. This is an event that's open to both InfraGard and non-InfraGard members. For the folks that are InfraGard members, you know what InfraGard's about. The people who are not InfraGard members, Dave will come back on, and he's the president of the local chapter, and he'll speak for probably a minute or two to let you know what InfraGard is before we get started. I'm happy you guys can attend. The price is right, $0. So when someone says there's no free lunch, that's not really true. InfraGard is a 501(c)(3), so all the folks producing this and working on it are volunteers trying to help with national security. A few house cleaning items. The event will be recorded. All attendees will be placed in mute. Any questions that you may have, you can post in the questions section on the dialog box. We'll do our best to address each and every one, depending on the time permitting. An important disclaimer, the contents of this webinar do not represent the opinions nor in any way intended to represent the FBI. It's solely the speaker's opinion, and we're here to assist with national security. We don't endorse InfraGard, or the FBI obviously does not endorse any product or service. What we try to do is we try to bring expertise to the table so that you can learn from the experiences that the people have. Kind of reflecting before speaking today, it's in normal housekeeping, you know, safety and health protocols. In a live event, we would discuss fire exits, bathroom locations, what we're having for lunch, or what the meals are going to be. It's kind of weird. Now we're emphasizing washing your hands while you're singing happy birthday, 6 feet apart, and wearing a mask. Definitely times have changed. So that's me and Dave, who will be the host and moderator. Dave is hosting it as the chapter president, and I'll moderate throughout the process. Today's event, we'll be talking about crisis management, talent and culture and compensation, important in navigating through COVID and beyond COVID, supply chain, some of the financial considerations, and we try to break it down by the different sectors within financial services: banking and capital markets, hedge fund, insurance, private equity, VC. We'll discuss some of the governance, risk, and controls. A hot button today is obviously working from home. How does that affect some of the cybersecurity and privacy situation that we have? Talk about some risk management, some incident response, and things that would hopefully be helpful to the financial services industry and beyond. The presenters that we have today, give me a second, I just want to go through some of the bios. We have folks from Citrin Cooperman, which is an accounting firm that's top 25 accounting firm, nationally recognized. They do full service assurance, tax and advisory, and they do have experience in the subject we're obviously talking about. That's why we invited them. They have offices in all US major cities, UK, India, and the Cayman Islands. They've been around providing services since approximately 1979 and have about 1,300 partners and staff. We have two representatives from Citrin today. We have Kevin Ritchie, who's a principal at Citron. He heads up the technology and cyber field, the practice called TRAC, which stands for Technology Risk Advisory and Cybersecurity. He has over 25 years experience in technology and cyber. He's a principal with Citron and a co-founder of their cybersecurity practice, providing risk assessments, security awareness, training, compliance, project management, data analysis to clients across the industry and spectrum. Kevin's also an active member of our Rhode Island chapter of InfraGard. Rhode Island chapter has better oysters, but New York has better pizza. So, Alex Reyes is a partner at Citron Cooperman. He's a partner in charge of the financial services industry, based in New York, and has over 20 years experience in assurance and advisory. He's a leader in the practice. He's a member of the audit and attest committee. He also has a broad range of assurance and advisory services for financial services, private equity, VC, real estate, and middle market. He has extensive experience with internal audit, accounting advisory, business performance improvement, regulatory compliance, both large and small market caps. He's a CPA and a member of many prominent financial services association. We have Tim Ryan from Sheltered Harbor. Sheltered Harbor was created to protect customers, financial institutions, and public confidence in a financial system should a catastrophe occur. Basically, Sheltered Harbor is not a vendor. They're a product or service. It's a not-for-profit, industry-leading initiative comprising of financial institutions, core service providers, National Trade Association, alliance partners, and solution providers dedicated to enhancing financial sector stability and resiliency. So Tim, who is our speaker, is the managing director at Sheltered Harbor. He heads up the adherence function at Sheltered Harbor and has been the person who's a major interface to the members of Sheltered Harbor. He understands the standards, controls, and other requirements when implementing Sheltered Harbor for the clients. He has over 30 years experience in various positions held in IT operation, tech support, and IT audit. He's also an adjunct professor teaching IT audit courses at Fordham Cabelli and Queens College. He's an executive member of the Risk Management Association. So welcome to the presenters, and we'll get to them just in a moment. Here you'll see their contact information if you want to jot it down, or you can obviously ask, and we'll put it up at the end of the presentation. So financial services, the importance of financial services. Obviously, financial services enables a country to improve its economic condition, production in all sectors leading to economic growth. We're fortunate here in New York to have some of the largest financial service organizations, which brings me kind of like just to a commentary. It's definitely a situation now where not one size fits all in financial services. Dependent upon the size of the financial service organization, dependent upon the particular sector within the financial services, insurance, banking, capital markets, dependent upon the region, can drastically make a difference on how you approach this COVID-19 situation. As we all know at this point, COVID-19, this pandemic, is not necessarily something we can just put our head down and have the wave go over and we're done. It's probably something that's going to require some resilience and some changes going forward. There's definitely going to be lots of changes from it. Just like 9/11 changed how the country reacted and how we dealt with business resiliency and business continuity, the pandemic's also going to affect probably ongoing how we do business, whether it's financial services or not financial services. If you think back, prior to 9/11, 9/11 in a way has made us more resilient as a country and has given us an opportunity to work from home and be productive. Prior to 9/11, as I remember, and I'm sure many of you remember, many people didn't work from home. Business continuity plans were there, but they weren't really tested. They weren't really a main focus of an organization, where now it clearly is. And because of 9/11, we're used to working from home, and it gave the ability to address this pandemic of having some productivity, especially in the financial services industry. Obviously, other industries like travel, the travel industry, the hospitality industry has really suffered, but financial services, for the most part, has fared pretty well. As you can see, even from some of the earnings from the major Wall Street companies, they've kind of gone through this and sort of survived. I think we're going to get to a point, though, that we're going to almost hit a Peter principle. We have some productivity from working from home because we're used to it and we're set up and we have the capabilities of taking pictures of a check and having it go to a bank. We can do lots remotely at this point, staying 6 feet plus away and still be productive. But I think we're going to hit some plateau where we can get to a certain amount of productivity, but we can't be fully productive. And that's going to create more of a gap from the companies that are larger in financial services, that have the wherewithal, the staff, the people, and the money to fully become digitized and address the financial services issues around the pandemic, versus the smaller regional banks and smaller regional insurance companies that are going to have a hard time. And hopefully some of the lessons today will be helpful to you. So thank you very much again for joining. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dave to talk briefly about InfraGard, and then we'll turn it over to our panelists. Thanks very much.
Great, thank you, Tony. And again, I'd like to extend my appreciation to both the panelists today and our financial services sector chief and our team for putting together another great webinar. You know, for those that aren't InfraGard members, there's a few tidbits up here on the screen about some fast facts. We are a national public-private partnership with the Bureau and represented by about 79 chapters and a membership population of about 62,000 members that are part of the individual IMAs or chapters. We are here to augment the NIST cybersecurity framework that's been initiated underneath the presidential executive order. And in that space here, I want to just go into a little bit more about New York Metro InfraGard on the next slide. So here's an example of our membership rankings. As you can see, information technology is dominating the membership major sector, the primary sectors, and financial services is right behind them. Those two are not only independent financial services, sectors, but they also cross sectors because they populate across the various sectors and share some common objectives. New York Metro's New York Metro's Sector Chief program is proud to represent not only our two chapter sector chiefs, but our two national sector chiefs for healthcare, Dr. Mark Jarrett, and for energy, Casey Carnes. So we are continuing to build out our sector program. Our members who are individually listed as primary sector members are going to be communicated with, as we've been doing so on our broadcast, and reaching out to them to deliver the value and the services of providing protection for our critical infrastructure. So again, those that aren't familiar with InfraGard, take a look at it. If you have any questions, please feel free to get back to us. And you know, there'll be a short poll. I'm going to just throw a question out there to see who we have in our audience, and then from that point on, I'm going to go ahead and close it and turn it back over to Tony.
Okay, we're going right to the presenter. So,
okay.
We're going right to Kevin. Kevin Ritchie. Okay. Kevin, take over.
Okay. Good afternoon. I hope everyone's staying safe and doing well during these exceptionally challenging times. And on behalf of Mr. Cooperman and Sheltered Harbor, I'd like to thank Dave and Tony and the entire New York Metro InfraGard team for providing us with the opportunity to present today. Really appreciate it. Our colleague Dave Roth is unable to join us today. He's feeling a little bit under the weather, so we are sending him our best as he works his way back to 100% health. Let's begin by providing a very brief overview of the topics we'll be covering. As we alluded to earlier, we've got a packed agenda today, beginning with what businesses did to manage the crisis when the pandemic unfolded earlier this year. From there, we then discuss how businesses recovered and reinvented to weather the storm and adapt to the new normal. We'll turn things over to Tim Ryan from Sheltered Harbor to talk about the importance of data vaulting and having a viable restoration solution. And we'll wrap things up with some guidance related to reimagining your future before we open the presentation up to your questions. Before we begin, we'd like to quickly provide you with a bit of background on our respective teams. Citrin Cooperman's Technology, Risk Advisory, and Cybersecurity, or TRAC team, provides services to a wide array of industries, including financial services. These services include IT risk assessments, risk advisory services, including internal audit, SOX, and compliance, and cybersecurity and privacy services, which include risk assessments, training, compliance, breach response, and vulnerability management. As for our financial services practice, we provide services to many businesses in this area, including domestic and offshore hedge funds, broker-dealers, specialty finance companies, private equity funds, registered investment advisors, registered investment companies, and banking and capital markets. I'll turn things over to Alex Bress, a partner at Citrin Cooperman and our firm's financial services practice leader. Alex?
Perfect. Thank you, Kevin. And we do have a lot to cover today, and thank you, Infogard, for having us. You know, on this slide, I just wanted to quickly, as we think about 2020 and the first 9 months, the words disruption, innovation, and change were common at the start of the year. And then COVID-19 hit us, right? And business as usual turned into a foreign concept. Companies across the industry had to evolve and transition into a new normal, a period that no one knew how long it would last. Companies had to reinvent themselves. So here we are in the fourth quarter of the year, and preparation, planning, and strong leadership will be critical in order to navigate change. Next slide, please. So today, you know, we want to cover how financial institutions across the spectrum took some actions in the issues that they developed as a result of COVID-19. So the actions and the issues. Some of these lessons all companies across industries can learn from. Next slide. Perfect. So at the start of the pandemic, as the country went on lockdown, companies really just went back to basics, right? So what does that mean, right? Evaluating business operations and priorities, understanding cash flow, liquidity, and access to alternative financing. And some questions, common questions that everyone was really asking themselves on the business front, really, you know, solid business plan for crisis management. Do you have one, right? Do you have the right team and a coordinated approach? Is your business model set up to handle a crisis like this? And can your technology and infrastructure support you? Obviously, financial strength of the company, and, you know, can you weather the storm? External advisors, having the right ones is always critical, particularly in these times of crisis. And it's important to note that while all companies had work from home technology or a business plan, no one really contemplated that for an extended period of time, you would need to have, in some cases, 100% of your employees working from home. So things like, will your technology hold up, cybersecurity, all of those matters are things that companies had to think about quickly as they were navigating this new normal. Next slide. So what's clear, right? Preparation is key. Strong preparation, critical analysis, and decisive action steps to position the business is critical, right? So keeping a focus, particularly with the uncertainty on capital expenditures, forecasting, budgeting in times of uncertainty, and really not knowing when things are going to get back to normal. A lot of companies are really looking at future business plans and continuing to reassess their business model given the current environment and how, you know, potentially this could change their business model going forward. It's clear, next slide, it's clear that companies across industry should be looking at multiple factors, right, as it relates to your business model. At the top of the list here is talent assessment, right, cultural review, supply chain, financial considerations, thinking about regulatory guidelines and how that could impact the way you do business. Product and customer assessment, how does that change? Looking at your market and competitive analysis, including an assessment of what opportunities could exist for acquisition, as you think about what it'll look like when you re-enter what could be new or abnormal, normal, if you will, moving forward. So all of these things really needed to be considered in 2020 as we're going through this pandemic. I think I'm going to pass it back to Kevin. It's going to cover some working from home issues.
Thank you, Alex. So due to the immediacy of the COVID-19 outbreak, the technology structures within financial institutions, and really every business, were forced to undergo a rapid metamorphosis, with employees displaced from the safety of traditional offices and scattered to relatively dangerous work from home environments. A transformation of this magnitude involved a rapid expansion of remote connectivity solutions with little time to test that proper security controls such as multi-factor authentication and monitoring were effective at such a massive and unprecedented scale. These technology risks were amplified with vulnerabilities related to the usage of unsecured personal computers and home-grade networking equipment that does not receive the same level of patching and firmware updates that corporate equipment would. Factor in an onslaught of spear phishing and malware attacks perpetrated by criminals looking to take advantage of the chaos, compounded by the inherent distractions of working from home, and the results are an exponentially more dangerous work environment. And second only to the healthcare industry, financial services has the misfortune of being one of the prime targets for cyber criminals during the pandemic. The following curated statistics confirm that COVID cybersecurity terrifying impact is not just theoretical, but instead all too real. For example, social engineering attacks against financial institutions are up over 600% since the pandemic began, with criminals developing a wide array of pandemic-related attack vectors. Malware attacks, including ransomware against financial institutions, are up 900%, with cryptic and emotet being the weapons of choice by cyber criminals. There are over 1,700 newly deployed high-risk coronavirus-themed domain names flooding search engine results every day, including a malware-infected facsimile of the Johns Hopkins University COVID dashboard that was particularly effective. And finally, Google is blocking over 18 million malware and phishing emails related to coronavirus every day. During the time spent just on this slide, almost 40,000 email attacks will have been blocked. The threats are all too real and they continue to evolve, growing in size, strength, and sophistication each and every day. And one of the few weapons we have against this surge of threats is awareness. So it is of paramount importance that cybersecurity training be revised to reflect the new work environment. It should include the security risks as well as the concerns related to privacy, including the danger of holding sensitive meetings within earshot of roommates, family members, and the now ubiquitous smart devices such as Amazon Echo and Google Home. Next slide. And it's critical that an emphasis on managing third-party vendors and service providers be part of any cybersecurity strategy moving towards fortifying an organization's defenses. Very few businesses were spared the impact of COVID, and that includes many third-party providers. So a risk assessment and ranking of each vendor should be completed to determine how a degradation of their services could in fact impact your organization's operations. If the vendor's workforce has been overly stressed or if their financial conditions have worsened, this could lead to upstream disruptions. So an annual due diligence assessment is critical to heading off unexpected interruptions from third parties. And as part of these assessments, it's imperative to review SLAs and system and organization control or SOC reports to determine what controls are in place and what triggers exist if agreements are not met. And while we would be hard-pressed to take any positives away from COVID, one byproduct of this pandemic is that it provided every organization with a de facto test of their business continuity plan. If you haven't completed a business impact assessment at this point, your organization should conduct one as soon as possible, gathering information about essential business functions dependent on the supply chain and evaluating their likelihood and the potential impact to the organization should a vendor be unable to provide services. And finally, from a business continuity plan should be developed and tested on a regular basis, complete with RTO and RPOs, as well as granular action steps and communication protocols to expedite the speed of restoring operations, including steps related to manual workarounds. back over to Alex.
Perfect. Thank you, Kevin. Now we're going to cover some other considerations, really across talent and with specific sectors within financial service. So as I mentioned before, companies are going to need to revisit multiple factors as it relates to their business model. And I say at the top of the list is people, right? Work from home. You know, the one thing this pandemic has forced companies is to implement widespread work from home. As I mentioned before, in many cases, you had almost 100% of employees working remotely for an extended period of time. And in general, you know, many were surprised at how well or seamlessly it seemed to work out. So companies are going to move away from viewing the physical office as the only, or in some cases, the best collaborative workspace. So as a result, you know, companies, as Kevin alluded to before, you know, will need to look to implement the right remote work technology to enable seamless communication and productivity over the long haul. Remote work technology brings a whole host of new concerns, again, as Kevin pointed out, that are going to need to be assessed by management if this, you know, becomes the new normal. The other thing that companies are, from a people perspective, need to reassess is compensation and benefits, right? Companies may need to conserve cash for operations to try and avoid layoffs, and they may need to implement broad-based salary reduction programs, right? We've seen some clients not do anything, right? Keep things business as usual. And we've seen some implement various types of salary reduction programs. Employers are also looking at making sure that they understand and are aware of the differences between a layoff and a furlough and what the implications could be from the standpoint of employee benefits. The other thing to think about is the volatility that's been going on in the markets have in many cases adversely impacted the stock price of some public and private companies. So if you're an employer that grants stock options, awards to employees, particularly if the awards represent a significant portion of the employee's total comp, you might need to consider an employee repricing program. And then culture, you know, a lot of times we forget that, you know, when you're doing work from home, the one thing that we need to make sure we look at is culture, right? How do I maintain a high performing culture with work from home more widely accepted? You know, often, you know, you hear, I don't want to lose the people culture that we've developed. So companies are going to have to pivot to stay competitive and make sure that the culture is, you know, what they want it to be. So effective technology can help foster a cohesive culture, right? To maintain a sense of unity and do things like hosting virtual happy hours and other things, just to make sure that you still have that sense of team. You know, during this pandemic, everyone knows that things are not business as usual, right? So give people the opportunity to understand what's happening, ask questions by communicating frequently and quickly. So the companies that have done this well, I think, have been very successful in leading during this pandemic. So now let's move to the next slide. You know, some things really impacting financial services as an industry. And financial services is broad, right? And the impact is different depending on the facts and circumstances. So we're going to try and keep this somewhat high level. Within banking and capital markets, as people are out of work and businesses were on pause because of the lockdown, many of the lending institutions were concerned, right? Generally, in periods like this, you have, you know, credit quality deteriorates quickly in some areas, especially in sectors or geographies that are hardest hit, right? This could overwhelm existing models for current expected credit losses, right? So requiring more resources to assess the impact of changing market conditions. This could have an effect on stress testing in general. So it's an area that needs to be focused on, particularly given the length of this pandemic. Now, given economic uncertainty, you know, banks should be developing and analyzing possible scenarios for weeks and really months ahead, maybe even longer, right? Still today, we're not sure when things will ever get back to normal. The flip side is that, we're in a very low interest rate environment, right? So there's also a lot of margin pressure on financial institutions. Given the financial crisis in 08, a lot of large banks now have ample liquidity and capital reserves designed to survive stress conditions. However, the speed of how events are unfolding is really putting that to the test. And depending on how you're generating your revenue, it's impacting some more than others. So banks have been really trying to quickly look for optimized strategies for managing risk rate sensitivity, earnings, liquidity, and capital, particularly given this prolonged near zero interest rate environment. We're already seeing earnings released, as mentioned earlier, for some major banks, and some are doing really well and not as well, right? And if you pierce through the results, you can see where the impact of the pandemic has hurt and helped, right? Trading revenue, in many cases, seems to be doing okay or really well, while anything like loan-related, debt-related, not so much, right? So really a mixed bag, but overall, the banks are weathering the storm well. Next slide. Let's talk a little bit about hedge funds, right? Not surprisingly, new opportunities for optimizing workflows, streamlining operations, and resource requirements are emerging. So hedge funds are looking at that very closely. So, asset managers are going to need to be innovative, right, with their business, at the same time being fiscally responsible and in the best interest of their stakeholders. Post COVID-19 is going to be very different than what it was in 2019 or even most of this year. So, managers are going to focus on both macro and micro level issues when making investment decisions. Early on, we expected, right, returns to take a hit in the short term as funds marked down their portfolios in step with the drop in public valuations. But a lot of the best asset managers recovered relatively quickly as the markets improved, while others, not as much. So, we expected more redemptions in the hedge fund sector, which we've seen some of, as investors reacted to the impact of the pandemic on the public markets. Fund managers are going to have to manage LP anxiety in order to limit this from happening more. So that's certainly something that's a focus. Fee pressure, right? Fee pressure was an issue before the pandemic, and it'll likely become a fact of life for a number of growing firms, right? Some of the larger funds may appear immune, but I think resistance won't be sustainable over the long term. So, fund managers are going to need to revisit fee models to better align with the current environment. On the next slide. Insurance, right? So as you might imagine, right, new business is trending downward in most products and markets, with both retail and commercial customers looking to cut back on spend. Some insurance brokers are struggling to operate in these disrupted times and are, bringing through considerably fewer new business proposals. So existing policies, some customers have canceled them, some are just not paying their premiums. So that, has become an issue. Payouts undoubtedly are set to rise. And as I said before, the ultra low interest rate environment that we now find ourselves in are going to impact investment returns, which may also be a hit by the ongoing volatility in the financial markets. So certainly the cash inflows for a lot of insurance companies will be impacted. And another thing is really dividend income is down, right? So that's an issue that certainly many insurance companies are dealing with. So insurance companies are looking for ways to adjust to this new normal, changing their go-to-market approach, products, etc. Certainly, the pandemic has impacted this particular segment considerably. Next slide. On the private equity and venture capital side, when you go back to the global financial crisis in 2008, deal making fell off, right, sharply. And in this pandemic, you look at the first half of the year, was down about 20%. But the other thing you notice is really the mix and types of deals were different, right, as funds pivoted as a result of the pandemic, right? In 2019, the good news is in 2019 was a record fundraising year. So PE funds have trillions in uncalled capital and are on the clock to spend it. So this dry powder are going to force GPs to stay on the lookout for deals, especially as valuations retreat. When you look at the first 9 months of the year, we've seen a record number of buyout deals, as an example, right? Some banks put lending for new deals on hold, right, as they focused on working with existing borrowers to avoid default. And a lot of private lenders stepped in to fill some of the gap left by the banks. So when you look at, the record number of buyout deals, that's a clear indication of that. And GPs at private equity and VC funds have really shifted, in particularly early on, to triage mode, right? Looking to diagnose what some of the challenges and try and stabilize the portfolios. So, you're going to see exits, drop, holding periods maybe extend as some sellers sit tight and wait for markets to recover. But I don't anticipate that the crisis is going to change the underlying confidence in private equity. I don't think allocations are going to change as long as the fund manager continues to deliver outsized returns versus the public markets over the long run. The other thing with private equity is that there aren't many PE funds don't allow redemptions, so this helps in avoiding investor issues. But the one thing is investors can demand full transparency when it comes to what the PE fund is doing. So that is certainly something that GPs or need to be ready to respond. So I would say that in private equity, it's certainly many have had to pivot, but overall, I think they've done a good job. And when you look at each of these segments, right, whether it's banking, insurance, PE, hedge, they all have some intersection with other industries, right? But what's clear is that, companies need to, as I said earlier, prepare, plan, and lead if you want to get through this stronger on the other side, and not think that you can continue to operate as if nothing's happened. And I think for the most part, many financial institutions have moved to do that and operate in a way that makes sense. I think I'm going back to, that's PE as well. I think we're going back to Kevin. Next slide. Sorry.
Thanks, Alex.
Yep.
Okay, so in terms of operational resilience during and post-COVID-19, companies will need to look at compliance in certain highly regulated activities such as trading in order to identify innovative solutions that facilitate the new norm of a remote workforce. And just as it was during the 2008 global financial crisis, risk management is once again critically important, and money managers will need to have a laser focus on managing risk, not only in their investment portfolios, but to the business as a whole, focusing on financial, operational, regulatory, IT, market, and credit risk. And the IT risk management program developed should include an integrated approach for enterprise-wide risk management, including the identification of risks and threats from both internal and external sources, the development or update of policies within the risk management function to guide risk management activities, ensuring the existence of a process to promote sound understanding and analysis of threats, events, assets, and controls, maintaining processes within the risk management function to help make risk mitigation decisions, determining the entities that should have involvement in that decision-making process. Want to get the right people involved there. And finally, ensuring that the board and management understand the risk categories. Next slide. And akin to sharks smelling blood in the water, uncertainty and panic send cyber criminals into a frenzy as they look to take advantage of the chaos to launch their attacks. Consequently, cyber readiness and security will be more important than ever to protect against the onslaught of COVID-related phishing scams that lead to stolen information and the deployment of malware. Companies should focus on establishing a new operating model to engage cross-functional risk and compliance teams to effectively work together in order to mitigate risk in a rapidly evolving environment, particularly given a remote workforce. I mean, key elements of this process include identifying and understanding critical physical and digital assets, including sensitive data, determining the bad actors who threaten these assets, and formulating the impact and likelihood of an attack. Before then implementing controls to protect these assets, a security framework that aligns with the organization should be leveraged to add structure, while also standardizing and expediting the gap assessment process. And using the trust but verify approach, the security of the environment should then be tested to confirm that the controls are in fact operating effectively. These tests can include vulnerability assessments, penetration testing, and simulated spear phishing campaigns. Next slide. And since we've established that the number of threats have grown exponentially during the pandemic, preparations should be made to quickly respond and recover from an incident, such as data that has been compromised. Due to the criticality of a financial institution's services and the multitude of applicable regulations, it's paramount that their response plan clearly defines roles and responsibilities, documents detailed action steps, establishes effective methods of communication, and that it is routinely tested, streamlined, and enhanced. And while a full-blown test of the plan may not be viable, periodic tabletop testing is critical and should involve key members of management so that in the event of an actual incident, the number of unexpected surprises are minimized. And if an organization does not have personnel with forensic experience, an alternative resource should be proactively sourced and put on retainer to expedite the response and recovery time. I'd now like to turn things over to Tim Ryan from Sheltered Harbor, where he'll be sharing his thoughts and expertise on data vaulting and restoration as it relates to financial institutions. Tim?
Okay, thank you, Kevin, and thank you to InfraGard for inviting me to present Sheltered Harbor today. So I'm going to cover Sheltered Harbor and how financial services companies are protecting their critical customer data. No surprise here. Cyber risk and cyber attacks are growing across the board, especially within financial services. Next slide. So under the Sheltered Harbor scenario, a devastating cyber attack takes out all production systems, including backups. And this is a scenario we saw a few years back when Sony Pictures was attacked. So in light of the outage scenario, the mission of Sheltered Harbor is to protect U.S. public confidence with financial services in case of a devastating attack, like a cyber attack, that causes your critical systems and backups to fail. Sheltered Harbor is a voluntary initiative created by financial services, which provides financial institutions and their customers with an extra layer of protection in the event of a damaging cyber attack directed at a financial institution. It's important to note that Sheltered Harbor is a standard or solution that financial institutions follow and implement internally. We are not a vendor or a cloud provider. Okay, next slide. So the Sheltered Harbor standard or solution, we have three important elements. The first is data vaulting, which we will cover in the next slide. Secondly, resiliency planning, where the financial institution prepares and tests business and technical processes to be activated in case of a catastrophic event. And in support of recovery capability, identify a recovery partner or recovery platform. The third element is certification, where the financial institution is awarded Data Protected Certified after meeting certain criteria and engaging a formal audit that assesses key controls and safeguards. Next slide, please. So how does the vaulting process work? So every night, the institution backs up critical customer account data into a standard format. That format used is the FDIC Part 360 format. The data is encrypted. The institution then transmits or sends the critical customer account data to a secure vault. The vault is immutable. In other words, the data cannot be changed. The vault is air-gapped, survivable, accessible, it's decentralized, and it's under the complete control of the financial institution. Once vaulting and controls are operational in production, the financial institution can apply for and be awarded Data Protected Certified. As mentioned earlier, it's important to note that Shelter Harbor is a standard or a solution that the financial institutions follow and implement internally. We are not a vendor or a cloud provider. Next slide. So this slide highlights the importance of having a resiliency plan and a designated restoration platform to enable the financial institution to recover from a devastating cyber attack. Next slide. And this slide highlights the Shelter Harbor ecosystem or community. You see we have industry guidance, alliance partners, and we also have associations that make up the Shelter Harbor community, or what we call the ecosystem. Next slide. We've also been showcased quite a bit in the news and in the media. These are some of the areas that we've been highlighted. And in 2018, we were awarded in the top 100 institutions by the CIO organization. Next slide. So what are the keys to success? The keys are having executive prioritization, coordination with other strategic initiatives. A good example is resiliency planning. Leverage the community, peers, working groups, and alliance partners. Utilize implementation accelerators and work with your service providers. Some of our service providers are providing the capability of doing the outsourcing the vaulting process. For more information, you can get more information on our website, which is Shelter Harbor, shelterharbor.org. And at this point, I'd like to turn it back over to Kevin. Thank you.
Thanks, Tim. If we can go to the slide right after Tim. Perfect. One more. All right. Before we open things up to Q&A, we just have our final two slides here. So we've made it through the presentation, and as it says here, your business is still here, your workforce is back, operations are running. Well, what else is there? Well, staying smart and resilient is certainly critical. We can almost look at this terrible pandemic as sort of an opportunity. So you can ask yourself, what lessons has the COVID-19 crisis taught us? What improvements and new processes and controls have been put in place? Was the vision we built initially correct for our path? Is work from home? What's the current focus there? Are there opportunities to branch out into new products and services that didn't exist prior to COVID? How have your customer expectations shifted? And finally, does your brand reflect who you still are and who you want to be? Next slide. And the list of questions may seem overwhelming, but again, these questions can lead to opening a door to a whole new world of opportunity. There are new plays and strategies that will need to be drawn up, and so that would lead to reevaluating your company's vision and position in the market so we can focus on what's working and what no longer fits. And obviously change is hard, but remember the saying, of course it's hard. If it was easy, everyone could do it. COVID-19 has certainly brought enough damage, but don't let this damage define your company's legacy. Instead, leverage the strength of your business. The future will undoubtedly be different than today, so just determine whether or not you have the right people, infrastructure, and data needed to manage this new normal. Okay, I'm going to turn things back over to Dave and Tony, and we can start our Q&A.
Okay, so we have a couple of questions that were gathered that I'd like to present to the panelists. Go on. So if you guys all, so Tim, Alex, and Kevin, if you can go on the camera, that'd be good. So the first question is for Tim, since you were one of the last speakers. When was Shelter Harbor created, and what led to the initiative to create Shelter Harbor?
Thanks, Tony. Great question. So Shelter Harbor was initiated about 5 years ago, and it was the result of, if we look back when Sony Pictures was attacked, the hackers took out their production and backup environment. And when the U.S. Treasury, they do a series of exercises called the Hamilton exercise. And when they did their exercise around the Sony Pictures attack, they realized that this was a great vulnerability within financial services, particularly in banking and brokerage. So that's what initiated Shelter Harbor solutions.
Great, thank you. So I have one for Kevin or Alex. I guess it's more risk oriented. What are some of the best practices related to cybersecurity awareness training? I know that there's lots of free tools through InfraGard, through CISA, Homeland Security, and I'm sure you have a whole portfolio of different things that you may want to share with the audience about awareness training.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, right now, over 91% of data breaches are directly related to spear phishing attacks, which basically are focused on attacking us, the end user. It's so much easier to get to our data and to infiltrate our systems through these types of attacks than it is to fight their way through firewalls and intrusion detection systems. So again, we are now effectively the weakest link in the security chain. So that's what makes training so critically important. So in terms of some best practices, you want to develop a training that works for your individual organization. There's a lot of great tools out there, as Tony just mentioned, through SANS and many other, you know, resources there. So you want to choose something that you feel is going to work for your team. You know, kind of gauge that level of sophistication so it matches your employees. You know, we recommend a concise, on-demand video training. Obviously, in-person training is not very optimal at this time. So you want something that someone could pick up and watch from home, maybe keep it to 20 to 30 minutes so there's you know, enough interest there and they retain the key concepts. I also think that it should be provided before anyone even puts hands on keyboards. Before someone gets hired, during the onboarding process, that training should be provided and then repeated annually for the entirety of the team. I think also anyone with direct contact to PHI or PII or other sensitive information should have additional supplemental trainings as well. And then again, probably one other really solid piece of best practice there is to trust but verify. Do a spear phishing campaign to make sure that your employees are in fact, you know, retaining the knowledge needed to identify and avoid these types of attacks.
Great, thanks. Okay, I have a question for Alex. How do you think the evaluations of portfolio companies within private equity or even a VC, how do you think it's affected the valuation of the companies?
Well, you know, historically, there have been a lot of standard models that funds and others have used in valuing companies. So like something like a discount cash flow model or others. I think this pandemic has forced companies to rethink more so the inputs, maybe less the model, but more so the inputs and assumptions that are being used. So, you know, before when you're looking at forecasting revenues, how's the pandemic really changing that, right? How's social distancing, stay at home, what type of recovery, how long do you expect that recovery to take, are all things that are going to affect your assumptions on revenues and earnings and cash flows. So you can't just assume that the assumptions that you used in the past makes right? You have to challenge those assumptions, work with if you're not doing it internally and working with a third-party firm, make sure that you're asking those questions so that the methodology that you're using, so the methodology might not change, but the assumptions could, depending on how COVID and this pandemic has impacted that portfolio company specifically today and really in the future.
Great, thanks. Tim, back to you. Another question about Sheltered Harbor. And sort of two questions I'm going to combine into one in the interest of time. How many organization members are there approximately? And how do you work with the regulators? Are they aware of, Shelter Harbor? I assume they are, but maybe you can give some insight.
Yeah. No, another good question, Tony. Thank you. So we currently have, Shelter Harbor currently has 130 participants, which includes banks and broker-dealers of all sizes. The 8 U.S. GSIPs are also members, and all the major service providers for banking and for brokerage services are included in our participation list. Regarding the regulators, we engage with the regulators several times a month. We do training exercises with them. We do presentations with them. And the regulators have also mentioned us in some of their materials. Back in 2018, the FFIEC came out with a cybersecurity resource guide for financial institutions, and Shelter Harbor was mentioned as a resource. The FFIEC examination handbook covering business continuity management also mentions Shelter Harbor within the examination handbook. And more recently, earlier this year, the FDIC and OCC issued a joint statement on heightened cybersecurity risks, stating, consider whether backup and restoration practices are consistent with industry standards and frameworks such as Shelter Harbor. So so we engaged with the regulators very frequently, and they are on board with what we're doing. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm just going to throw a quick poll out. I'm going to give it 10 seconds because I have a bunch of questions that were lobbed at me, and I want to make sure that I understand the audience a little more. So I'm just going to launch a quick poll. Okay, thank you for the ones that responded quickly. Just wanted to get a feel, kind of what I assumed. But I guess this is more for Kevin, since we have some non-financial services people on the webinar. From a general standpoint, what are the privacy risks associated with all these IoT devices, such as the Amazon Echo and all these other devices?
That's a great question, Tony. So yeah, there's many dangers associated with really any Internet of Things or IoT devices, but these for example, Amazon Echo or Alexa, as it's commonly known, they're pretty ubiquitous at this point. Pretty much every household has one of these smart assistants, and unfortunately, they can be hacked, and it could just be a simple compromised account, or it could be some more creative hacking techniques, which are pretty frightening. For example, researchers were able to make the microphones in an Alexa respond to light as if it were sound. So by using a laser pointer to send light commands to a smart assistant, researchers were actually able to force the Alexa device to unlock a car, adjust the thermostat, open a garage door, and many other activities. So pretty serious stuff. And another example comes from the cybersecurity firm Checkpoint, which just published its latest research documenting some additional vulnerabilities, misconfigurations and cross-site scripting, which allowed these researchers to access Alexa accounts and in turn personal data relatively easily. So Amazon has said that they've since corrected these issues, but it's kind of like whack-a-mole. You correct one and bad guys will find another one. So again, just be careful if these devices are in a work from home environment, because unfortunately we don't know who's listening.
Okay, I'm just going to lob a quick one to Alex because I'm trying to be conscious of the time here. It's 2 o'clock. Just a quick one. Just 10 seconds before we cut to a commercial. How well prepared do you think the banks were for the pandemic? And you can group all the banks together.
I think overall they were well prepared. Obviously, depending on the bank, it's different. But the crisis in 08 helped, right? Banks, put things in place that helped them this time around. So I the sense I get is that overall the preparation of the banks was good.
Okay, it's 2 o'clock. I just want to be conscious of the time. I wanted to thank all the panelists, Alex, Kevin, Tim. Thank you, Dave, for hosting this. Thank you to all the attendees for coming. There's some people behind the scenes, Patrick Flattery, another board member who's been doing the production behind the scenes. I'd like to thank him. I also like to thank some of the other board members who've helped out. And also just a shout out to Steve Winternick, who's our FBI partner, who's been helpful in keeping this on the rails correctly. So thank you, everyone. Thanks for joining. I think a survey, I'm not an expert on using webinar, but I think a survey shows up when I exit. Patrick, this is where you come in. Your voice.
You're correct, Tony.
What's that?
You're correct. It comes out after they finish.
Okay. Dave, is there anything you want to say? Or it's 2:01, so I want to let people go.
No, we're good. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you very much for attending. Thanks, guys. Thanks for presenting. Take care. See you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.